And we're going to go ahead and get started. So this is Ian from Userscape. Also joined today by Matt and Rebecca from Userscape. So we're going to go through admin training here. Going to kind of jump around a little bit, a lot of different things I want to cover, some kind of tips and tricks, best practices, as well as just introducing you to maybe some features you weren't aware of or hadn't used previously. What we're going to do is take the questions at the end in the QA period. So if anything kind of strikes you as I'm going through, just go ahead and ask your question in the questions box in the GoToMeeting panel. And then I'll be going through those at the end, and we can kind of jump around and cover all of them. You should all be currently seeing HelpSpot training installation we have set up. You'll see it's just mostly fake data in here from Alice in Wonderland, so don't be surprised by that. And let's jump in. Okay, so I'm in the workspace, which I'm going to assume everyone's pretty familiar with, but there's a few kind of sections in here I want to touch on, especially around filtering, since that's something as an administrator that usually you'll end up doing a lot of. So we have some filters already in place here, but we're going to jump in to thinking about using the filters for managing your staff and keeping an eye on different requests. So as you know, you can create your own custom filters here. And when you do that, you can define a series of conditions that control what requests you see. So you might use them, as we've done over here, to show the requests that are open for a certain agent or for open requests in categories. A lot of times you'll combine these in different ways. Maybe you want to see requests that are open in a particular category and maybe that are escalated, for example. So you can do that. And you can go through and obviously chain these together to get very specific about what you're seeing. Now, a few conditions I want to touch on, and there's obviously many conditions in here for date and time filtering and request detail filtering. But some people aren't aware that there's also subgroupings. So this can be really handy. Change this a little bit. If we wanted to see, for instance, everything that was open across a series of categories, we could say where any of the following are. So it's open and any of the following are true. So we want to see everything that's opened where the category, is in any of these sales categories, let's say. And I'll get all three of them in place. We can test that. Okay, so we have 27 open in these three categories. So the groupings are really nice. The subgroupings, they can help you cut down on the number of filters you need often, as well as show you exactly what you want to see. The other thing I want to point out in the conditions is the custom where SQL clause. So this is a pretty advanced feature, and I'm not going to go into writing SQL here in the demo, but you can write custom SQL against the HelpSpot database. So if you have something really particular you want to pull out that the built-in conditions don't allow for, you can actually write your own SQL part of the where clause of the filter and pull up requests that are very custom. So just want to make you aware of that option. Now, let me get rid of that. A couple other things I want to touch on here is some options we have in the options tab. Specifically, one that's really underutilized is the grouping. So this can also help you reduce the number of filters you need and give you a more unified view. What this will do is let us group the results set of the filter by any of this sort of data. So by the open date or by customer information, or by categories and assigned status. So let's choose assigned to here. Let's go back and let's just call this everyone open. So this is going to show us all the requests that are currently open grouped by the assigned user. So I'm going to save this just to show you in the full interface. so here we see the requests assigned to Abe, to Ashley, to Catalina, Claire, and so on. So all grouped, and we can even check within these groups. So if you've traditionally not used this grouping view, but have just kind of organized them in the column views by who's assigned, and you can do that as well, but the grouping adds this bar and just makes it an easier kind of dashboard screen to see. Again, you can group by category or a whole bunch of different other options as well, date and time. So that's a really nice option. Another option that, in case you weren't aware, is that you can display these filters above the inbox. So in a lot of installations, you might have defined essentially your own custom inboxes, or you just have filters that are very key to your workflow. If you have that, you can set this checkbox, and if we save this, we'll see that now this appears right at the top. So it can be nice if you really have filters that are more critical than the inbox and you really want to highlight them, that rather than them be down here with kind of your regular filters, you can bring that up to the top. Back in here. One or two other things here, just reviewing my notes so I don't miss anything. Another nice thing for filters just in general is to use it to show escalated requests. So if you do use escalations like we do at Userscape, you can have a filter that shows escalated and or multiple tiers of escalated. Here I'm doing it by status type. You could use custom fields for this as well. And again, use that in conjunction with maybe making it more prominent. Can be nice to just give you a nice workflow for that. The other thing to touch on here is the permissions. So this controls who can see the filter. And this is really nice because sometimes we'll go into a HelpSpot installation and all the filters have just kind of been defined for everyone. And so it gets really cluttered over here, and you have a lot of people seeing filters that don't necessarily need to work with that often or ever. And so it can be more efficient to control the permissions by permission group. So, maybe this is a filter that the help desk staff level or the admins and the help desk staff level need to see, but the other groups don't. We'll talk more about permission groups in a little bit, but you could control who needs to see this filter. You can also identify just specific people. So maybe this is just something me and Claire work on, but not anybody else. Then we can just have that filter be for me and Claire, and it doesn't have to clutter up everyone else's navigation. One other little trick here is you can save an existing filter out as a new filter. So if you edit a filter like I've done here, and I want to save it with a new name, I can do that if I made some adjustments, but I want to leave the existing filter in place. And the other neat little trick is get a filter, run the results. You can have it show you the filter SQL. So this is the actual query that was run against the database to generate the results. So this can be useful if you do work with the HelpSpot database directly for either custom reporting, or you have other systems that work with it. You can get the actual SQL that the system creates, and so that can often be a good starting point for those kind of customizations. All right, let's jump back out to the workspace. Just a couple things to touch on here. So we have our filters, and what often ends up happening is you'll have a filter and you'll end up going in and out of it a lot. So you'll be in the filter and you want to see what's going on with all these different requests. And so you'll be keeping an eye on these. Escalated queue is a good example. So you're going into a request, and then you're going back out, or you're using the peak view and you're going through it this way. And those are all effective ways to do it. But sometimes when you're just keeping an eye, the stream view can be really helpful. And so if you go here, what you'll get is just the individual notes that were recently added to those requests. So if I go into a bigger one here, we can see all the public notes that were recently added in all the requests that match this filter. So it's a really handy way to just keep an eye on a group of requests without having to go into each one to read the latest updates. Just gives you that quick view. You can kind of take a look and see what's been done, and just keep an eye on things. So stream view, definitely something to note. Go here. The other thing, a lot of you might be aware of this, but I do like to touch on it as well. If you're in an installation where maybe you have downtime and a bunch of customers email you simultaneously, or you have internal systems that either go offline, or you just have things like sales that generate a lot of nearly identical customer requests, then the batch responding can be really useful. In the filter, you can select the requests that you want to batch. And with the batch responding system, you can write back to all of these customers simultaneously. So they'll each get an individual email, so it'll be unique to them, but you don't have to write that email 10 different times. So you can just write it out once and batch them in one shot. You can also check this box, which is handy. What this will do is it will create a filter that includes only the people who were included in this batch. And so that gives you a handy way to go back into that filter that was created and give those same group of people an additional update, for example. So that's a nice little feature if you do need to follow up with these folks again. Okay, so from here, I'm going to jump into the request screen. We do go through filters and all these workspace details in the agent training. So if you want to see more about those kind of nitty-gritty details of filters and all that, I would definitely recommend signing up for agent training. I'm going to jump now, though, into the request screen. So a few things to touch on here. First of all, I always like to emphasize live lookup. I know a lot of you are probably using it already, but live lookup lets you integrate HelpSpot with your other data systems so that your agents don't have to leave HelpSpot to look up information about customers or transactions, or if you're using it for internal support, you can get their information out of Active Directory, for example. Whatever systems you use, they can be integrated with HelpSpot via live lookup so that you can access all the information on this person you're working with right from within the HelpSpot UI. You can also insert that information back into the HelpSpot UI. So again, it just cuts down a lot on errors. It saves a tremendous amount of time. Live lookup can also be run automatically with the triggering system, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And that's really handy because with automating live lookup, what actually happens is that, let's say a customer emails you, the trigger will run as soon as HelpSpot receives the email and will actually populate all this additional information dynamically in real time without you having to do anything. And so normally with an email, you would just have the first name, last name, and email. But if you hook it up with live lookup and you set it to populate with a trigger, then it can insert the phone number and insert the customer ID. If you have custom fields, those can be populated. So all that stuff can be populated as soon as HelpSpot creates the request. And then all that information is available for your filters, for example, and for the other automation systems, so that all that data is right there, ready to go. The person will show up in the right filters immediately, all those kind of things without a staff person ever having to manually run live lookup or any sort of delay in having data having to be entered. It'll just be real time. One other note just about live lookup is that live lookup can also display information that isn't necessarily inserted into HelpSpot data fields. So it can return links or even an HTML table of order history or anything like that, which is just information that you display to your agents, either just for their own knowledge or again just to make working with other systems faster, like a link off to this person's page in your e-commerce system, for example, or in an HR site. If you need to go into those systems and, for example, make a change, they don't have to search for this person. They can just be linked directly to them. not going to cover kind of the basic fields here, but a few things to note. Ooh, let me jump into a different request to make this more clear. I'd just like to touch on the idea of subscribing. So if there's a request and it's urgent, or there's just a lot of back and forth and you want to keep an eye on it as an administrator or manager, you don't necessarily want to be assigned to it. So if you subscribe to it, then what will happen is any updates to this request, you'll be emailed those updates. And this way you can kind of stay in the loop on it. Also, from the workspace, you can access any requests that are open and what you're subscribed to here. So we can always get back here and we'll see that I'm subscribed. Just a good way to keep an eye on what's going on with certain requests that you really want to stay on top of. Along the same lines, staff can actively subscribe other staff. So if I was an agent, I could do add notifications, and let's say I'm going to notify a certain other person here. So I'm going to notify Jordan, and normally this would just send the body of the email I'm writing to Jordan, which it will still do, but if we check this box, then Jordan will also be subscribed. So this again is helpful if you have agents that know that a person needs to kind of keep their finger on a certain issue. They can be subscribed to that issue. So again, it's kind of a nice middle ground between assigning it to Jordan in this case, where maybe I still need to be the agent who's managing this request, but Jordan is, either I need to get his feedback, or he needs some awareness of the issue that's going on. So we can let Jordan know about it through notification, and then we can also subscribe Jordan so that any future updates by the customer or by us, Jordan's notified about those. So that's kind of a nice little thing to proactively be able to subscribe. One or two other things here, just to touch on. External notes, it's not always clear to folks how they might want to use those. External notes allow you to email a third party. So normally you're going to be publicly emailing back to the customer, or you might be adding private notes that are just for your internal use. External notes let you email a third party privately. So perhaps the customer has an issue and you want to email a vendor about that issue. Perhaps it's a vendor of yours that needs to actually address it. So you can email the vendor by setting a to, and they'll be emailed. The history of that email will be kept in the history of the request. If the vendor or the third party replies back, that will be threaded into this history, but also privately, so the customer doesn't see any of that interaction, but it still stays within the history of the single request. So external notes can be kind of handy for those, again, accessing third parties, but keeping that history in one spot. Also, I'll just note that there's the address book function here as well. So if you do use external notes a lot, or even just for CCing, BCCing, you can add contacts here so that you can have quick access to them. So you have to type emails over and over. And also, it can be integrated with Live Lookup as well. So if you've connected Live Lookup, a data source to Live Lookup, you can search Live Lookup for contacts and insert them that way as well. Okay, so what kind of other main area here is responses that I want to touch on. Again, you're probably using responses, but I just like to touch on to make sure you're using them as effectively as you can be. So we create a response for password resets, right? And that's a very common one. We can dynamically insert customer information if you're not aware of that, so that this is useful across any customer. Okay, so this is kind of a traditional example. We're going to have a complete reply here that we can use over and over, so we don't have to type this reply. Something else that's good to think about is that this note doesn't have to be a complete reply. So it can just be a single paragraph, which is something I do a lot. If you have a series of steps that people often have to complete, which you end up typing in the middle of a larger, more customized response. just have a response for that paragraph of steps. Or I use it a lot just for things like an individual link, to our pricing page. So you can just have something like this. So I will end up emailing people, the link to the pricing page often, and rather than having to go copy paste that or type it out, just have it as a response, and it can be inserted. And you can use as many responses as you want every time you use them in a request. So you can use these together even, which is really handy. These also can be organized into folders. You can control who sees them. So again, maybe this isn't really for everyone and you just want to isolate it to certain groups. You can do that. Or it's just for yourself, of course. Something new in version 4, if you're not on HelpSpot version 4 yet, or you are, but you haven't noticed this, is you can attach documents to responses. So if you have a document that you send out over and over to customers, you can just attach it as a response, and you can just use the response to attach the document. So you don't have to file navigate for them or anything like that. So that's a really handy new addition. And the final thing, just to be sure you're aware, is that you could do a lot of other things when you use a response. So you can change a status or change a category, set reporting tags, whole bunch of different options, set CC fields, and so on. So these just help you with you being maximally efficient. If you know whenever you use the password reset that this is what you classify as general support, then just go ahead and set that category. We know that it's going to be problem solved, for example, all those sort of things. So I'm just going to put that back in. All right, so let's add a response. We just go to create a request manually here. So everything's empty. And we can just navigate to our response or search for it, hit enter, and it inserts it, and sets the category, sets the status to problem solved. So again, just a nice quick way to respond to customers efficiently and set these fields without having to do all that manually. Okay, so a couple items I want to touch this will be in your personal preferences, but it also can be done from the administration screen for individual staff. There's a lot of different settings in here. I'm not going to go through all these, but again, in case you're not aware, there's an out of office feature. So this lets staff have requests that would have otherwise been assigned to them to be auto-assigned to someone else. So for example, maybe we have some automation that in a certain scenario automatically assigns a request to Claire. We can set her out of office to instead go to Matt. So this would, if anybody tries to assign something, actually this is Abe. So we're editing Abe, and any request that would have been assigned to Abe will instead be assigned to Matt if we save this setting. So staff can set this themselves, like before they go on vacation, for example. And this way, anything that would have been assigned to them will be automatically assigned to their cover person or just to the inbox if you prefer. And when they get back, they can just set themselves to available. One other option to cover in here is just this notify an unassigned new request notification. So if you want to be notified anytime there's a request that comes in that's not assigned to anyone, so it's just sitting in the inbox, and that's a checkbox that you or your agents can use to get notified about that scenario. And there's a whole bunch of other customizations in here as well. But those are a couple that people often miss, so I like to point those out. From here, let's talk about, we're going to jump around to some different settings and tools as well as reporting. So first, I'm going to touch on custom fields. So HelpSpot has 11 different types of custom fields, drop downs and drill downs, and text fields, date fields, number fields, Ajax fields. So Ajax fields actually can be dynamically connected to a server of yours to create a drop-down selection list dynamically, which can be nice if you, for instance, need to return a certain number that's customer specific. You could do that. Kind of a handy field, and check boxes, numbers, and so on. So I'm just going to put one in here. Could be anything. The other thing to point out here is that custom fields can either be category specific. So maybe this only applies to these certain categories. So this custom field would only be seen on these categories. Or we can set it to always visible, so that just no matter what category is selected, it's always available. We can mark it required, and we can put this on the public request form. So this will be on your portal. If we check this, it'll be available on the portal for customers to answer as a question for them. When you create a custom field, it's actually a full-fledged field in the system, so you can filter on it and you can report on it, all those kind of things. You can use it in the rules. So a lot of different possibilities when you build the custom fields to store your custom data. Jump into settings. Lots of different settings in HelpSpot to tweak the system, exactly to your needs. The main one I want to talk about really today is business hours. Again, something people sometimes miss. You can set your help desk hours under the business hours settings, and so you can say if you have full days off, your start and end times on given days, as well as entering in different holidays so that those are taken into account. And what this will basically let you do is adjust your reporting primarily, although it also has application in the rules, so that certain rules, for example, may not take action, whether depending on if you're inside or outside business hours. Several of the reports can make use of the concept of business hours when calculating times. So, for example, if you're calculating first response speed time, do you want to count all hours, just regardless of when your help desk actually operates? Or do you really want it to only calculate on your business hours when you're actually available to answer requests? And so if you have business hours in place, then you'll be able to filter down the reports based on business hour. Let's go to organization. So again, jumping around a little bit here, but just want to talk a bit about the concept of permission groups. So the permission groups out of the box, we have a number of different permission groups. And hold on. Sorry about that. A number of different permission groups. And so these are kind of standard. Administrators have access to everything. Help desk staff level are going to have access to all the core features, but they won't have access to the administrative area or reports. And then it goes down from there to more and more limited access. But you can create your own groups. And this has a twofold purpose. So you can use them in kind of the traditional sense of giving people certain permissions. So do you not want people to have the ability to view knowledge books, for example, or to view the forums, or to merge requests? Do you want people to be able to manage spam and manage trash, access different parts of the system? There's also some more kind of severe permissions. So we can have people who can only view requests that are assigned to them, so they won't be able to view any other requests in the system, or are limited to their own categories. So this can be useful in a number of different scenarios. If you have different departments all in a single installation, you might want to create groups for those departments, and then they would be limited to just their categories of requests, so they can see all the requests in their categories, but requests that are outside of their categories they wouldn't see. And that's also where you're going to use some automation, most likely, to make sure requests that, for example, come into their mailboxes get assigned into one of their categories so that they can see them and work them, things of that nature. So that's kind of the traditional permissioning. but they can also just be used for organizing your views of information. So as I was talking about before, where you have uh, those controls and the filters and the responses to keep the interface just a little more organized, you might want to create groups that have basically the same sets of permissions. So they're the same permission-wise, but you're going to use them to help control the filtering and the responses to specific groups. So that if you have HR and IT, for example, in one HelpSpot installation, HR doesn't have to see all of IT's filters, for example. So it can be useful to use in that way. Okay, let's talk about rules. There's a lot of different elements to rules. So, and understanding the difference between the types of rules is definitely critical. So triggers, these are going to be real-time rules. So triggers are watching your installation for changes. And when a change occurs, you can have actions that are performed. So for example, we could say when a request is created, maybe anytime a request is created, for example, we want to run a live lookup. So that's what I was talking about before, where you can actually have live lookups run as soon as requests are created. And in that scenario, if it finds just a single match for that person, so it finds an exact match, it'll go ahead and populate all the fields in HelpSpot that it knows about with data from your customer system, so that data is instantly being filtered on and usable by staff. You can also post a webhook. There's a whole bunch of different actions that are, so posting a webhook is a more technical operation. Maybe you want to integrate HelpSpot with another system. So you can go ahead and have it post to a URL just to let that URL know a new request was created in this case. Maybe you have more conditions here. So a request is created and it's open because it was just created. And the note body contains a certain bit of text, or it's from a certain customer, it's urgent, it was auto assigned to a certain category by the mailbox and you want to do something. So different possible options there. And then again, you can maybe auto assign it or set a custom field value, a whole bunch of notification options to email staff or notify staff or email third parties. So a lot you can do there with different actions. And so that's kind of in the sample of creating them, but you can also have them watching for updates. So maybe we want to say when a request, there's a certain scenario we're keeping an eye on where a request changes from sales demo category and it went to the prospect category in the sales subgroup. So in this scenario, maybe we want to notify a certain person. Whatever the case may be, and we can dynamically insert a whole bunch of different information in here on this request. If we want to put information about the customer, for instance, it'll automatically have a link as well back into HelpSpot. We can have more than one action, so maybe we're going to notify a person when this happens. We're also going to set a custom field or add a private note. Okay, so we can have a private note as well as this email that goes out. So you can group up these actions with the triggers that are always watching to have different actions performed. Under the trigger options, we also have some different settings. So this is again where business hours comes into play. Maybe we have a trigger that we only want to run in business hours, or we have a trigger that's only for outside of business hours. You can do that. Sometimes triggers create staff notifications, like on a reassignment or when it updates a request that is already assigned to someone. And if you want to suppress those, you can go ahead and do that because you don't want the assigned user, for example, to receive an email. Then you can force it to not generate an email in that case. So a lot you can do with triggers, really handy for um, anytime you're watching for a certain scenario, sometimes for escalations even, more often for kind of business case scenarios of you want to be notified as soon as a VIP customer emails, or there's a scenario like a series of categories you're watching, things like that. Anything that needs to be tracked in real time. Automation rules are basically the companion to triggers. So triggers are real time. Automation rules run on a schedule. So they are run by the system generally every minute, although you can control that frequency. And by not waiting for actions to occur, but instead by proactively querying the HelpSpot system, you can do a lot of neat things, especially around escalations or watching for delays or SLAs. So for example, we might want to say, when we have a request that's open and where the status is still active, and where, let's say, the last public update, has been more than, we can set this, a day. So this is now a request that's kind of been sitting around for a while. What do we want to do in that scenario? So maybe we have an SLA where we have to do something, or we're just kind of in general, obviously keeping an eye to make sure requests aren't taking too long to be resolved. We can go ahead and do something about this. So we might want to escalate by reassigning. Again, you could have these for particular categories even. So maybe we want to reassign it. We could also do something like set the status to escalated, which we'd probably want to do. We could also, again, email someone or push the information out via a HelpSpot request push or a webhook to a third-party system. So a lot of different things we could do here. Maybe we want to, in this case, we're going to notify the assigned staff person. Okay, so we could have an email go out, and so HelpSpot can manage all this for you. Again, we have similar options where we can suppress staff notifications that might come out of this in some scenarios where we want to do that. And we also have the option, this is a more advanced option here, but basically you might have some rules you want to run on their own schedule. So maybe once a minute isn't right for the rule you're writing. Now for this rule, we want it to be every minute, because as soon as it crosses over this threshold, we want to perform these actions. But maybe you have another rule that you just want to run once a day, then you can do that. You would set this to only run when a certain script that's part of HelpSpot is called directly. And in our documentation, we explain how to go about doing that. And that would let you create a custom schedule for this particular rule. So triggers, real-time, automation rules, actively querying the system. Automation rules tend to be more for SLAs, escalations, kind of batch operations, and triggers are going to be for business rules and things of that nature, where you're moving things around in real time. Then we also have mail rules, which are similar to triggers, and you can do some of what they do with a trigger, but mail rules apply only to new requests that come in via email. So triggers and automation rules apply to any request, no matter how it's created. Mail rules are only for new requests, so not for updates, and only to email. And they're very similar to what you would find in like a desktop email client or Gmail, where you can say, the email is, to one of your accounts, or the email is from a certain customer. The subject contains a certain, maybe hard-coded phrase that comes from an automated system or something like that. So a couple different options here. And if it matches those conditions, again, you have the same kind of actions as the other rules to reassign it or send notifications. And again, it can be all times, or it can be only applied in or outside of business hours. So mail rules are a little bit more special case. Can be nice if you're kind of more traditionally used a lot of email rules in your help desk. It can be a nice way to transition into the kind of HelpSpot rule base. For most things, you'll be using triggers and automation rules, but mail rules are handy, especially if you're a heavy email-based installation. One other little bit here that I want to cover in system is filter management. So this is new in version 4, and this just lets you, maybe it was the end of version 3 actually. Can't remember now, but it's fairly new. And it lets you just see all the filters in the entire installation. So it's a handy way to just see all the filters, which previously wasn't possible, regardless of who built them. It lets you delete them. So if you need to kind of clean up, you can just delete them right from here. And it also lets you just see how fast they are. So, the filters are extremely powerful, and it's possible for someone to create a really bad filter that is very taxing on your system. So it tracks how fast they run, and it highlights any filters that are especially slow. So we don't have any here in our training installation. And that way you can kind of focus on those, as a first step if you are seeing if anybody has issues with a filter being slow or anything like that, or their workspace being slow to load. Sometimes they've defined a really crazy filter, so you'd be able to take a look at that. Other thing to note here is that this is also where the error log is. So if you are seeing any problems, the error log is always a good place to check, and there'll be additional information in here. And of course, if you contact our support group, we'll often have you looking in the error log for related issues. So I want to get to reports, and then we'll do some Q&A. So go ahead, and if you do have any questions on anything we've covered so far, again, you can put questions in the Q&A tab. I do see a few in there already. We'll get to those in a couple minutes. Okay, so reports. We have our today board, which is kind of just going over what is happening today, the number of interactions, our first response speed, the number of requests created this week and last week. So just an overview. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Requests over time. So this is obviously going to be kind of a bread and butter report. So what's the volume of the requests you're receiving? You can default to a 2-week period, but we can set any period we like. So maybe we want to see this entire month. Do that. Maybe we want to see a whole year. Do that. So we see our support volume's been increasing here. We can control the grouping. Let's go back to doing, we'll do 1 month, and we can control the grouping. So is it by day, by, even by hour, if you want to go down to that level, by month, by year. Okay, so this is for the month of November. We can also group on a whole bunch of other things, which is really handy. So maybe you want to see your busiest hour of the day. So we can do that. So here we can see, the 6 o'clock hour is a lot busier than the 7 o'clock hour in our sample data set here. So this can be great for kind of figuring out staffing levels and schedules. I'm just trying to see what times of day are busy. You can also do the same thing for day of the week. So, we're busier on the weekend here and less in the middle of the week. Month of the year. Really handy is the ability to group on category. So we can see which categories are getting the most requests just at a glance, all the categories. We can see this as just data in the data tab as well. All this data can always be exported to CSV. We can also group on any custom fields that have predefined values, like drop-down lists can be grouped on. You can also group on category reporting tags. So you can see across one category set of reporting tags. So really handy. You can filter this down further, of course. Maybe you only want to see, requests that were assigned to a certain user. Do that. You can also group by assigned user. We can kind of see number of requests across all the staff over that time period. Once you kind of get a report the way you like it, you can save it, and then that way the only thing you'll need to do next time is reset. Save that. So it'll be available over here, and then next time I would just need to set the date period I want to see, but I wouldn't have to reset the grouping or any filters I applied or anything like that. So requests over time for the basic kind of big picture overview of your request volume. Now in the analysis, we get into the more detailed look. So first response speed is always an interesting one. This is going to be how fast we're initially replying to customers, so we can see if people are waiting a long time to initially hear back from us. So this is where we get into how we want to calculate that. So it defaults to actually being based on your business hours, but it could just be based on all hours if you don't want to take business hours into account. We can have this display in hours or even minutes. Control the grouping here by day, month, year, time frame. And we can also filter this down as well. So maybe we are interested in only seeing this for a particular category of request. We could do that, and we could see if there's differences between the different categories and things of that nature. And get the data here as well, can be exported. So a really good report for kind of getting a handle on your initial reply speed. I'm not going to cover all these, but interactions over time, another nice report. So rather than focusing on the number of overarching requests, interactions over time shows you the number of actual notes that your team is creating, so that you can really get a sense of the actual volume. So here, for example, there were 65 staff created notes that were public and 54 private notes and 56 notes sent in by customers. So we can actually see the number of notes that are kind of flying back and forth beyond just the number of requests. Resolution speed, similar to first response speed, but this is going to be the time between opening and closing a request. This can also take business hours into account, or it doesn't have to if you want to switch it to all hours. And again, we can filter this down for different categories, and we can just see over time kind of our response speed or our resolution speed on how quickly we're able to close out requests. A couple other reports in here that are just handy. If you are using the knowledge book system, then the portal will track searches, and the most interesting one, we don't have any data in here for this one right now, but is searches with fewest results. So basically, HelpSpot will track what people are searching on in the portal and show you which search queries happen most frequently but have no results or very few results in your documentation. And so this way you can keep an eye on this report and add documentation on those items that are being searched for a lot with no results. That's kind of the key requests reports, excuse me. There's some other ones for time tracker if you're using a time tracker, and but I'm not going to go into those right now. One other one, response usage. This can be handy for just seeing what your most popular responses are, your pre-written responses. And I like to just use that to make sure those stay up to date and make sure that we're not sending out old information. And if it's one that's being used a lot, as from an administrator perspective, it can be nice to know what that is. Is that something that's being sent out a lot because there's a problem, and really, we should address the core problem of why that response is used a lot, or is it really just something that it's not fixable per se, but is just something we need to use a lot, and then it's just about maintaining that and keeping that up to date. Okay, so that's the overview. We're at 50 minutes in here, so a little bit of time for questions. Let me bring those up here. All right. Okay, so first question is on when writing SQL in filters, is there a directory of tables that can be called? So in the interface here, there is not. When you go and select custom SQL, there is not. Now, you can look in the HelpSpot database, of course. There's also some example scripts we're actually putting together on GitHub that's already out there. We're actually reorganizing that to be a little bit better even. So as we come up with different custom filters, SQL filters, we're putting them in. Let me see. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it here. This might be it. Yeah, so here's some example ones. Again, we're reorganizing this, so it'll be a little bit different fairly soon. But here's some examples. So here's, we're going to find requests where a response was used. So we could take this as a starting point. And so we're going to build up a little repository of these as starting points for you. But right now you would have to go into the HelpSpot database. Also, definitely something that you can contact us for support on if you have a question on getting something out that you can't with conditions and you want to use SQL for it, we could definitely assist you with that. Okay, let's go through. So here's a question on they have several companies or brands, and what's kind of the best strategy for creating categories, and should we create categories by company or just one category list for everyone? So that depends a lot on your organizational structure, really. It's done both ways, and there's not really a right way per se to do it. You can create groups of categories as we've done here. So we have a sales group. These could be brands or company names with categories within them. That way usually works best if you have more of a departmental setup or if you have different companies where they're relatively isolated. And so you're going to have different categories for each department or brand or company, and there's not a lot of overlap between the people there, and they're basically going to be separate. Otherwise, if it's really like the same person dealing with the same types of issues, regardless of which brand or which department it comes into, then oftentimes you'll want to just have one series of categories because let's say they come in with a technical issue and you run a service that has 3 brands that all use the same basic software infrastructure, but they're just branded differently. So that one site that sells shoes and one that sells shirts and one that sells towels. If there's a technical problem, the same software developers are going to fix it regardless. So having one central category so that you know how many technical issues you had in general, and so your routing and things like that can be more organized and a little bit simpler. It's usually better to have one category. You'll still probably want to keep track of the brands or departments, and that's usually best done with a custom field in this scenario I'm describing. So you could have a custom field that is just a drop-down list of brands or company names or departments, and that can be set in with, for example, a trigger. So you might have a mailbox. So here's one, right? Brand B. We could have a trigger that says when a request is created, if the mailbox is brand B, well, we know that that's only going to be a request for brand B. And so we can set the category, to the proper, the custom field to the proper, brand category in that case. And you could also then do other things like set a certain category and so on and so forth. But that's a good use of triggers, is to automate the assignment of departments or brands, things of that nature, into your categorization. So The most widely used case is one set of categories and the brands or departments stored as custom fields. But if there is a lot of isolation between the groups, then distinct categories for each group, using the category grouping so that they stay organized and they're not so hard to navigate through. Because if you do get a huge list of categories, that's not great, because when you go to select from them, you end up with a giant list and it's hard to train new agents and it gets just complicated to deal with and takes a long time to select from. So you can use the grouping to at least allow the agent's eyes to quickly get into the right zone and go from there. So I know the perfect answer, it depends a lot on your organization, but those are kind of the main two strategies. Look up the next question here. Okay. So best way to link requests together. So new hire, for example, has many requests to be completed by various people, kind of parent-child relationships. So right now, HelpSpot doesn't have the concept of a parent-child ticket, but there are a few different strategies for that. Normally, what I recommend there is to build the process into more of a workflow. So you could use custom fields for that. You might have, for example, so let's say we have a category for new hire, and so we'll just build that out. Okay, so we have a new hire category, and then we can have custom fields. Let's say they're checkboxes, for example. So we might have a computer we need to get. So this is going to only apply to new hire. Close this out. And we can do one other one. So we enter into HR systems. Again, this is only going to be for new hire. Okay, so you know, the request can be created on the portal form or however you're doing it, and this will be probably the person's name. Okay, so this is going to be the steps we need to complete. So we might have some general info here. Probably going to make this private. Okay, so we have that. And then from there, you know, how I would normally do it is have just a series of filters that people work off of. So we could have a filter for, so this is not exact, you might want to put this in a folder. So it's open and computer is not checked. And we want to limit this to just the new hire category. Okay, so save that. And then we can have a second filter. Actually, don't even need that new hire, but it's all right. And again, we would have a couple options here. Categories new hire, and enter into HR is not checked. Edit that guy. Just put them in the folder. Okay, so now we'd have these out here. Actually, I'm going to make one more tweak. We want to see the counts. Okay. Now all the people who need access to this would be able to see these. They could go in and work their aspect of it. So maybe their IT, they know they need to deal with new hire computers. They can go in and address that. You would also then probably want to have different automation around this, like a trigger for when a request is created with the category new hire. We can notify the assigned person in each group that needs to do something in that case, for example. This is just one way to handle it. I've seen it handled a whole bunch of different ways, especially the new hire scenario. You could assign it around the different people, like when the IT person takes it, and this is, say, step one, they could actually assign it to themselves, and then it could be assigned to the next person. The assigning it around is useful in that it's then very clear who's working on any given point, but at the same time, since in the new hire scenario specifically, a lot of times these things can happen simultaneously. So having it set up as a series of filters that people work off of works really well, since they can all individually be working on their piece of it, and it kind of goes from there. So they can then update this one request. So the information's all in one request in a single spot, and then the responsible agent can close it out when that process is complete. Having some kind of linking for requests, though, is something that we do plan to look into a little bit more. I'm not sure it would be exactly parent-child because that gets complicated in other ways, but a more formalized linking method is something we're kicking around. Okay. Let me see. Okay, so how to, we kind of covered that. Hold on. We have a question about kind of samples of the knowledge books. I would say for finding samples of that, you could definitely just go to support.helpspot.com where we have, these are all knowledge books. This is our HelpSpot portal that we've customized to look like the rest of the HelpSpot website. These are all knowledge books. So you can definitely have a look through there and see what you might do to customize. You do have full access to the portal templates, so they can be fully edited and customized as well. You have the ability to edit those in the UI via the portal templates. They can also be edited on the server itself if you're an on-premise customer, so that you can work with those in local development clients and really heavily customize it to your branding or different things you might want to add that are outside the scope of HelpSpot even. So all that can be modified and put in place. The same person asked about customizing the portals. So all these portals templates can be edited right through the interface. If you have secondary portals, so secondary portals allow you to have multiple portals for different brands or departments. And so you can just create the portal through this form. After you complete this form, there is a couple files that you need to put on disk on the server itself. And if you're an on-premise customer, it gives you instructions how to do that. If you're a HelpSpot Cloud customer, then we would help you with that part of it. And once those are in place, you'll have a whole additional portal. And we have customers with hundreds of portals for hundreds of brands they maintain. So you can have different portals for different brands. Each of those portals can have its own series of public categories, so that when your customers go to the form on the portal, they see only categories appropriate for that brand. Same thing with custom fields that are public, or knowledge books that are public. You might only have different knowledge books for each brand, or maybe some that are shared across brands but not others. You have full control over that. Control over which email address is used for emails that go out from that portal, as well as customizing the homepage and so on. And then once you build a secondary portal, it's also possible to edit its templates through this UI. So you can edit and customize it fully with access to the source code to do that. So definitely a great way if you deal with multiple departments or multiple brands and you want to give each its own unique experience, then the secondary portals and the portal templates are a great way to do that. You can also, just to bring that full circle, the secondary portals and even what we call the primary portal, the built-in portal, default portal, all that information can also be filtered on and used in rules and all those kind of other automated aspects of HelpSpot. So again, you could have a filter that shows you only requests that were created via a certain portal. That's another great use of what we talked about in the beginning of the subgrouping, because you could do something like requests that are open where any of the following are true. So where the mailbox was brand B, or the portal is a particular secondary portal. So if we had secondary portals here, we would select it. And then this way we'll see everything that's open, but only that were created via the mailbox for this brand or for the portal for this brand, and not any other mailboxes brands that we might manage. And again, all this also reportable, all those kind of things. So fully integrated into the system, let you get that data back out easily. Okay, any other questions? Question queue is empty. If not, I really appreciate everyone taking the little over an hour here to go through the admin training. This was actually only our second of these trainings, so we're just getting rolling with it. So we'll actually be emailing you all for a little bit of feedback. We'd definitely like to keep improving it, and if there's things we didn't cover or we need to go in more depth on it, let us know. There's also an advanced topics session we're running that's in the coming weeks, so you can check out helpspot.com/training for info on that. And that's going to be mostly, a good chunk of that's going to be QA for your weird and interesting issues, and we can dig into those, as well as covering a topic or two that are on the really kind of advanced end of the spectrum. So check that out. And thanks again for coming. Looks like no other questions. So everybody have a great day. We will just be in touch for a little bit of follow-up in the coming days. Have a happy Thanksgiving if you're in the States here. All right, great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.